I am Dorothy, and I'm 72 years old. They say that with age comes wisdom, but I often feel like I've collected nothing but dust and forgotten things. My husband, Robert, passed away 3 years ago, leaving behind a silence so deep it felt like a physical presence in the house. The scent of his pipe tobacco lingered in the study for months, a phantom that both comforted and haunted me. Now the house is just quiet. Too quiet. My son, Thomas, is a good man, just like his father. He's a lawyer, busy and important, and he calls me every Sunday at noon without fail. But the real light in my life, the one who truly fills the empty spaces, is my daughter-in-law, Jennifer. Or at least that's what I used to believe. Jennifer is the kind of woman who remembers your favorite brand of tea, who brings over homemade biscuits just because, and who listens to my stories about Robert's quirky habits with genuine interest. She's tall and graceful, with a cascade of honey-colored hair that she wears in a neat bun, and her laugh is like a gentle chime. She was my rock after Robert was gone, the one I leaned on when the world felt too heavy. But things started to change a few months ago. It began with little things, so small I almost dismissed them as the forgetfulness of an old woman. My favorite silver locket, the one Robert gave me on our 25th anniversary, was in the drawer instead of its usual place on my vanity. My pillbox was open when I distinctly remembered closing it. I found a receipt for groceries from a store I never shop at, tucked into the pages of my favorite cookbook. Did I buy this? I'd whisper to myself, shaking my head. Did I go out and simply forget? Then the money started to go missing. Not large amounts, nothing that would make me call the police, just $20 here, a $10 bill there, the kind of money you might drop in a hurry or misplace in a cluttered purse. But my purse isn't cluttered, and I'm not in a hurry anymore. I have all the time in the world. I keep my money in a small beaded coin purse, a gift from Jennifer last Christmas. I had $100 in there, neatly folded. A week later, there was only $80. I counted it again, my fingers trembling slightly. I told myself it was a mistake. A week after that, there was only $60. A cold dread began to settle in my stomach, a feeling of betrayal so profound it felt like a physical ache in my chest. I started to watch Jennifer more closely. I saw her lingering by my study desk, her hand hovering over a small carved wooden box where I kept my emergency cash. I saw her look at my jewelry box a little too long when she thought I wasn't looking. I started to notice how she would take my shopping list and a $100 bill and then return with the groceries and change that never quite added up. She would tell me the prices had gone up or she bought something extra, a small lie that scratched at my trust. It felt like I was living a television drama, but the villain was the one person I'd come to rely on the most, the quiet, gentle, perfect Jennifer. My mind, trained by decades of love and loyalty, screamed for me to trust her, to find a logical explanation. But my heart, raw from Robert's absence, and now this new wound, whispered a terrible truth. I felt a conflict tearing me apart. The love I had for my daughter-in-law versus the evidence that was piling up against her. I was stuck between wanting to protect her and wanting to protect myself. I needed to know the truth. I needed to see for myself. I decided to set a trap. A simple, foolproof test that would either confirm my worst fears or put my mind at ease forever. It was a terrible, desperate thing to do, but I felt I had no choice. The next time Jennifer came over, I would leave an envelope on the kitchen counter containing exactly $50, a sum too big to be a simple mistake. It would be my silent question, and her actions would be the answer. If you believe that everything you thought you knew about your loved ones can be a lie, please subscribe to our channel. The feeling of betrayal was almost unbearable, but I had no idea that the real truth was far worse than anything I could have ever imagined.
The envelope sat on the kitchen counter, a pale yellow square holding my little trap. Inside, I'd placed 3 crisp $20 bills and a 10 for a total of $70, a sum too neat to be a mistake. I'd even made a tiny, almost invisible pencil mark on the corner of one of the 20s, a trick Robert taught me decades ago when he suspected a mechanic was overcharging him. I felt a pang of guilt, a sharp, cold jab in my heart. This was my own flesh and blood. My dear Jennifer, the girl who called me Mom. And here I was, playing a detective in my own home. My internal monologue was a constant battle between the parent, who wanted to believe the best, and the adult who demanded a rational explanation. Jennifer arrived a few hours later, her usual cheerful self. She was humming a tune from a Broadway musical as she put her purse down. She immediately noticed the envelope. "Oh, Mom, what's this?" she asked, her voice light and innocent. "Just some cash for the week," I said, trying to sound casual. "Thought I'd leave it out so I don't forget where I put it." She smiled, a sweet, open smile that reached her eyes. "You're getting so organized, Dorothy. That's a great idea." I watched her from the corner of my eye as she bustled around the kitchen, tidying up, making us both a cup of tea. She picked up the envelope, glanced inside, and then placed it back on the counter. My heart pounded a little faster. It was all a test now, an ugly, necessary test. The next few days were a blur of nervous anticipation. I tried to act normal, to laugh at Jennifer's jokes and talk about the garden, but inside I was a coiled spring. I felt a strange mix of shame and pride. Shame for suspecting her, and a stubborn pride that I was smart enough to figure it out. The little pencil mark on the bill felt like an accusation, a physical manifestation of my doubt. My son Tom called on Sunday, and I could barely focus on his words. He was talking about his latest case, but all I could hear was the rustle of the envelope on the counter. When Jennifer came over 3 days later, my heart was a drum in my chest. I went to the kitchen after she left and found the envelope. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside, there was $60. $10 was gone. The pencil-marked bill was still there, but another one was missing. My stomach dropped. I leaned against the cold countertop, a wave of nausea washing over me. It wasn't my imagination. It wasn't forgetfulness. My perfect Jennifer was stealing from me. I sat down at the kitchen table, the one that Robert and I had shared thousands of meals, and I felt a grief so deep it eclipsed the grief I had for him. He had always told me that family was everything, that they were the people you could trust implicitly. The world was now a bleaker, colder place. I saw my own reflection in the window, a small, weary woman with a face full of unspoken accusations. But then, the most unexpected thing happened. As I was about to tuck the envelope away, a small piece of folded paper fell out. It was a receipt, not for groceries, but for a pharmacy. It was dated the day before, and the total was exactly $10. It was for a prescription I didn't recognize. My curiosity warred with my sadness. The prescription was for Martha Higgins. Who was Martha Higgins? I didn't know anyone with that name. My mind raced, jumping to all the wrong conclusions. Was this some kind of scam? Was she buying medicine for a secret family member? The truth I had so desperately sought was now even more tangled. I decided to make a call to the pharmacy, a place where Jennifer sometimes picked up my own prescriptions. I used my most polite voice, explaining that I was trying to track a family member's medication. The pharmacist, a kind woman with a gentle voice, was hesitant at first, but eventually gave me the information. "Oh, Martha Higgins," she said softly. "She's a dear woman, but she's had a rough few years since her husband passed. We're glad Jennifer is helping her out with her prescriptions." My world tilted on its axis. My head began to spin with a dizzying realization. Jennifer wasn't stealing from me. The $10 wasn't for her. It was for someone else. Martha Higgins. The name echoed in my mind, a complete stranger who had somehow become a key to understanding what was happening. It was a sudden, concrete fact that shattered my initial assumptions, leaving me with a new, even more profound question. Why would she do this in secret? Why couldn't she just tell me? I felt an overwhelming sense of shame, but this time it wasn't about her actions, it was about mine. I had been so convinced of her betrayal that I had completely missed the bigger picture. My simple black and white world had just been painted over with shades of gray. I felt a surge of new emotions, gratitude, confusion, and a deep-seated need to know the full story. I had a million questions, but the most important one was, what other truths had I been blind to? The name Martha Higgins burned in my mind like a brand. I couldn't stop thinking about it. The simple fact that Jennifer wasn't stealing for herself, but was helping someone in secret, completely upended my entire narrative. I was no longer an outraged victim. I was a foolish, suspicious old woman. The shame was a bitter pill to swallow. I felt the internal conflict of the parent in me who wanted to apologize profusely to Jennifer, and the adult who still needed answers. Why the secrecy? Why lie about it? Driven by a mix of guilt and curiosity, I decided to take a walk. My legs, which hadn't felt this purposeful in years, carried me down the street to the end of our cul-de-sac. The last house, a small bungalow with a neglected garden, belonged to an old woman I'd seen only a few times from a distance, a woman I now knew was Martha Higgins. My breath caught in my throat as I approached the front door. The paint was peeling, the blinds were drawn, and a small, worn-out welcome mat lay on the porch. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorbell. What was I even going to say? "Hello, I'm your neighbor, and I've been snooping on my daughter-in-law who has been secretly helping you?" The door opened just as I was about to turn away. An elderly woman, frail but with a surprising spark in her tired eyes, looked at me. Her hair was a thin white halo, and she clutched a threadbare cardigan around her shoulders. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice soft but firm. I'm Dorothy," I stammered, feeling utterly foolish. "I live down the street. I think I know my daughter-in-law has been helping you." "Oh," she said quietly. "Jennifer. She's a very kind woman." We talked for a long time. Martha told me about her late husband, a man who worked at the same factory as Robert, my husband, but who was laid off years earlier due to health issues. She spoke of her meager pension, the medical bills piling up, and the deep loneliness that had settled in after he was gone. She confessed that she didn't have any family nearby. It was Jennifer who had discovered her situation, not through pity, but through a genuine human connection. Jennifer had simply noticed her looking lost in the pharmacy one day and offered help. It wasn't a handout. It was a quiet, dignified act of care. A profound realization hit me. Jennifer wasn't stealing. She was a hero. And I, in my blind suspicions, had been the villain of my own story. The shame was a hot, stinging sensation. I thought about all the little lies, the missing money, the weird receipts, and it all made perfect sense. She was trying to help without drawing attention to it, without making a big deal. She didn't want the gratitude or the fanfare. She just wanted to do good. But as I sat there listening to Martha, a new kind of terror began to creep in. She mentioned something that sounded familiar. She said, "My husband, he used to talk about your Robert all the time," she said with a wistful smile. "He said Robert was a good man. So good he helped my husband get a few extra jobs here and there when he was struggling. A real good Samaritan." My heart skipped a beat. Robert? Helping a man I didn't even know about? In a way I didn't know about? It didn't fit the image I had of my husband. He was a good man, but a private man. He didn't share his acts of kindness, especially not financial ones. A small, cold seed of doubt was planted in my mind, a feeling of what if. I had seen Jennifer's secret, but what if there was a secret from my own past that I had been blind to? My perfect marriage, my perfect husband. What if I had only seen what I wanted to see? That day, I learned two things. My daughter-in-law was a better person than I could ever have imagined. And my husband? Well, I suddenly wasn't so sure about him either. I had found the truth about Jennifer, but it led me to a painful question about my own past.
The conversation with Martha left me shaken. I walked home in a daze, the world feeling both more complex and more fragile than it had just a few hours earlier. The idea that Robert had a secret of kindness I didn't know about, was both heartwarming and deeply unsettling. It made me question everything I thought I knew about our life together. The memory of his pipe tobacco suddenly felt less like a comfort and more like a sign of a life he kept separate from me. I decided I needed to talk to Jennifer. I felt a desperate need to apologize, to confess my horrible suspicions, but I was terrified of what she would say. Would she be angry? Hurt? Would our relationship ever be the same? I felt an overwhelming sense of guilt, a feeling of I should have known better. My transaction with her was from the child ego state, suspicious and defensive, while she was acting from the parent state, nurturing and selfless. When Jennifer came over the next day, the air between us felt heavy with my unsaid words. I asked her to sit down with me in the living room, a place reserved for serious talks. The afternoon sun streamed through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I took a deep breath, ready to confess everything. Jennifer, I began, my voice trembling. I owe you an apology, a terrible one. I've been a fool. I know about Martha Higgins. I thought you were stealing from me. The color drained from her face. Her eyes, usually so warm, were filled with a flash of hurt and a deep sadness. She didn't say anything for a long moment. Then she reached out and took my hand. "Oh, Mom," she said softly, "why would you ever think that?" I explained everything. The missing money, the receipts, my desperate trap. The shame was suffocating. I told her about my conversation with Martha and how I had discovered the truth. She listened patiently, her eyes never leaving mine. When she finished, she squeezed my hand tightly. "I'm not angry, Mom," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm just sad. I wanted to help Martha without making it a big deal. She's a proud woman. And I didn't want to worry you. You've been through enough." Her words were like a balm on my wounded heart, but they also introduced a new, unexpected twist. She pulled a small, worn photograph from her purse. It was a picture of a young girl, no older than 10, standing in front of a crumbling house. "This is me," she said, her voice cracking. "And this was my grandmother's house. After she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, no one helped her. She died alone and destitute. I swore I would never let that happen to anyone again. When I met Martha, I saw my grandmother in her. I had to help." My eyes welled up. It was a classic domino effect twist where a seemingly insignificant event from her past had created a cascade of actions and motivations. But that wasn't the biggest shock. She continued, her voice lower now. "The real reason I couldn't tell you was because a few months after Robert passed, I found a small box in the back of his sock drawer. It was filled with old receipts and bank statements. They were all from Martha's late husband. It looks like Robert had been helping them for years in secret. It was a small stipend he set up for them, a quiet way to help a friend without anyone knowing. It was his way of protecting them. When I found out, I knew I had to carry on his promise. I didn't want to tell you because I was afraid you would be hurt that he had a secret from you. My husband, my wonderful, kind, private Robert. He had been a secret benefactor all along. He had known about Martha and her husband, and he had helped them without a word to me. The realization was both beautiful and devastating. My heart ached with love for the man I thought I knew so well, but it was also filled with a new kind of pain. I had been so sure of my own story, my own memories, but it turned out I had only been reading half the book. The narrative I had created about my perfect life was crumbling. I had been the one who was blind, not because of a lack of evidence, but because of a lack of imagination about the depth of love and generosity that could exist right under my own roof. My husband's secret was not an act of betrayal, but an act of profound, silent love, and I never knew it.
The revelation of Robert's secret left me in a state of profound silence. For days, I walked through the house, the ghost of his silent generosity a more tangible presence than the scent of his pipe tobacco had ever been. The photographs on the mantelpiece, the ones where he smiled his gentle, knowing smile, now held a new, deeper meaning. I saw him not just as my husband, but as a man with a hidden life of quiet kindness, a part of him I never knew. The feeling of betrayal was gone, replaced by a deep, humbling shame. I had spent so much energy and emotion on suspicion and bitterness, convinced that someone was taking from me, when in reality, my own home was a place of endless giving. My daughter-in-law, my son, and even my late husband were all part of a chain of goodness, a domino effect of compassion, and I had been completely oblivious to it. I felt like a character in a play who had been given the wrong script. I started spending more time with Jennifer, but our conversations were different now. The playful banter was replaced with a quiet, mutual understanding. I asked her about her grandmother, about what it felt like to watch her struggle alone. She spoke with a soft melancholy, and for the first time, I felt not just like her mother-in-law, but like a true confidant. We talked about how hard it is to ask for help, how often pride gets in the way of survival, and how sometimes the best kindness is the one that's kept a secret. We were no longer two women in a family. We were two people connected by a shared, painful understanding of a broken system and a hidden kindness. I also found myself reflecting on my own life, my own fears. The child in me, which had been so afraid of being taken advantage of, was finally being quieted by the adult, which recognized that true strength lay in trust and acceptance. The small, missing amounts of money, the misplaced items, they were no longer symbols of my victimhood. They were now monuments to Jennifer's compassion and to Robert's quiet legacy. I realized that my fear of being a burden had made me suspicious, but Jennifer had shown me what it meant to be a support system. One afternoon, I sat in Robert's old study, flipping through some of his old books. His scent was gone now, replaced by the smell of aged paper and leather. I pulled open a drawer that he always kept locked, something I'd never had the courage to open before. Inside, nestled beneath some old ledgers, I found a small brown envelope. It was not a bank statement or a will. It was a note written in his familiar, steady hand. "My dearest Dorothy, if you are reading this, I am gone. Please don't be angry that I had a few secrets. They were always of the good kind. Take care of our people. They are the true riches." His note was not an accusation, but an invitation. It was a final, loving challenge from beyond the grave. Our people. He wasn't talking about our son or our grandchildren. He was talking about people like Martha, the forgotten ones, the quiet sufferers. He had trusted me to understand, to carry on his work. I suddenly felt a wave of purpose wash over me, a feeling I hadn't experienced since he was alive. I was no longer a widow, lost and adrift. I was a guardian of a legacy of kindness, a torchbearer of his silent mission. I knew what I had to do. The path was suddenly so clear. The sadness of losing him was still there,
a soft ache in my heart, but it was now accompanied by a warm glow of hope and purpose. The domino effect wasn't just a story about Jennifer. It was a story about me. My whole life had been building up to this moment of revelation, and I was finally ready to accept my new role. The note was a turning point. It was a final secret, a final gift from the man I loved that was about to change the rest of my life.
The note from Robert was a final gift, a parting message that was both a confession and a call to action. It was a testament to the life we had built together, a life that was far more rich and complicated than I had ever imagined. The anger and suspicion had completely dissolved, replaced by a profound sense of purpose. I realized that my husband hadn't kept his charity a secret out of a lack of trust in me, but because it was simply the kind of man he was, a silent benefactor, a quiet hero. And now he had passed the torch to me. I made a phone call, not to Jennifer, but to my son, Thomas. I asked him to come over that evening. When he arrived, I sat him and Jennifer down in the living room, the same place where I had confessed my suspicions to her. The air was different now. It was no longer heavy with my shame, but with a new, quiet strength. I told them everything. I spoke about the missing money, my terrible mistake in suspecting Jennifer, and the incredible discovery of Martha Hickens. I then told them about Robert's note, his secret legacy of kindness, and the small hidden bank account he had set up to help our people. Tom listened, his face a mixture of surprise and profound admiration for his father. Jennifer, my sweet Jennifer, just smiled, a gentle, knowing smile that told me she had suspected the note existed all along. The final twist came from Thomas, who had a revelation of his own. "Mom," he said, his voice full of emotion, "I knew about the note. Dad showed it to me a year before he died. He made me promise that if anything happened to him, I would make sure you found it. He said you would know what to do with it." My heart swelled. My son, my husband, my daughter-in-law, they were all in on this secret, not to deceive me, but to protect me, to give me time to grieve and heal before I was ready to take on this new responsibility. They had all been acting from a place of deep, protective love. The shame I had felt for my suspicions was now overshadowed by an overwhelming feeling of love and gratitude. That evening, we didn't talk about money or secrets. We talked about people, about how there were so many Marthas out there, people who were too proud to ask for help but so deserving of it. We made a decision together, as a family. We would carry on Robert's mission. We would use the fund he had started to create a small, private charity in our community, one that helped the elderly and the vulnerable, in secret, just as he would have wanted. The final act of my story wasn't of revenge or confrontation, but of healing and forgiveness. I forgave myself for my suspicions, and I forgave my family for their beautiful, loving secrecy. I realized that the greatest tragedy isn't being betrayed by someone you love, but failing to see the love that's right in front of you. My journey from a suspicious old woman to the guardian of my husband's legacy had changed me completely. My grief for Robert was no longer a crippling weight, but a source of strength, a beautiful reminder of the man he was and the man he hoped I could become. I am still Dorothy, 72 years old, but I am not the same woman. The house is still quiet, but now it's a peaceful quiet, a quiet full of purpose and meaning. The silence is no longer an empty void. It is a canvas waiting for me to paint a new story. The story of a life lived not in fear, but in love and kindness.